The evening was heavy with the smell of dust and the faint sweetness of corn pollen drifting across the fields. The sun sagged low, painting the horizon in bruised colors of orange and purple, while the cicadas shrieked as if the day itself was struggling to hold on. Clara Mayfield moved along the porch steps with bare feet, her arms still trembling from the weight of the buckets she had carried from the well. Her dress clung to her skin, damp with sweat, patched in so many places it hardly looked like fabric anymore. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, the strands too stubborn to stay pinned, and she hesitated at the door. Inside, her father's voice was already rising, low and jagged like gravel dragged over tin. She could smell the sharp, acrid sting of his whiskey even before she turned the knob. He was in the chair, slumped but alive with rage, his weathered hands gripping a glass that had seen more drink than water. His face was lined with years of sun and bitterness, eyes bloodshot and restless. Clara's heart sank, but she stepped in anyway, clutching the empty bucket to her chest like a shield. "About time," he snapped. "You think water hauls itself?" "I hurried, Pa," she said softly, setting the bucket down. "Not hurried enough," he spat. His gaze raked over her like she was a thing to be judged, a faulty piece of equipment he couldn't fix. Then his lip curled, and the words tumbled out with the venom of a snake striking. "Lord help me, girl, you'll never be worth anything. You're ugly. Ugly as sin. Ain't no man ever gonna want you." The word cracked against her like a whip. She had heard whispers before, laughter from girls in town when they saw her skirts too short at the ankle, or her face too plain beside theirs. She had seen the way boys ignored her, looked through her like she wasn't even there. But from her father, the man who had raised her after her mama's passing, it cut deeper than she thought words could. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The house around her tilted, the boards of the floor seeming to groan under the weight of his cruelty. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to scream, to shout that beauty didn't matter, that she worked harder than anyone, that her worth was more than her face. But her voice betrayed her, strangled by the lump swelling in her throat. She turned away, her vision burning, and stumbled out the door before her father could see her cry. The night air hit her lungs sharp and cool, the stars just beginning to bleed through the twilight sky. Clara sank into the dirt, her bare toes curling into the soil, her chest heaving. She wrapped her arms around her knees, wishing she could fold herself small enough to disappear. The word ugly echoed and echoed, louder than the cicadas, louder than the rustle of cornstalks in the breeze, and then the earth shuddered. At first she thought it was her own grief shaking her body, but no, it was real. The ground trembled beneath her palms, a low rolling thunder spreading outward. She gasped and scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting toward the horizon. In the distance, beyond the far edge of the Mayfield farm, a shape rose like a mountain pulling itself from the dirt. Her heart leapt into her throat. The figure was moving, slow, deliberate, massive. The air itself seemed to thrum with the sound of each footfall, heavy and deep, sending vibrations through the soles of her feet. Clara's breath hitched as the figure grew closer, its details sharpening in the pale silver of the rising moon. A hat brim wider than a roof shaded the face. Shoulders as broad as the barn door loomed. Boots the size of wagons sank inches into the ground with every step, leaving craters in the soil. And then, when he finally drew near, she saw him, a cowboy, larger than anything she had ever imagined, towering over the farmhouse as though it were a doll's toy. The giant cowboy crouched, lowering himself until his face hovered close to hers. His eyes were storm gray, shifting like clouds before a tornado, and his breath carried the scent of earth and smoke. His grin spread slow and wide, revealing teeth white as river stones, and his voice rolled out deep and booming, rattling the windows in their frames. "You look edible." Clara's mouth went dry. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, her heart pounding so violently she feared he would hear it. The word edible rang in her ears, sharp with danger, strange with mystery. Was he going to eat her? Was this the end of everything, snatched away by some nightmare pulled from the soil? Edible? she whispered, the sound barely carrying into the vastness of his gaze. The cowboy chuckled, and the sound was a thunderclap that shook the barn doors. His head tilted, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Edible don't always mean food, little one," he said, his voice warm yet dangerous. "Like a fire you want to touch but know might burn. It means alive. Means burning with something worth tasting. And I see it in you." Clara felt her cheeks flush hot. Alive, burning, worth tasting. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not the neighbor girls who mocked her, not the boys who never noticed her, and certainly not her father, who carved her down with every word. For the first time she felt seen, not for her face, not for what she lacked, but for something deeper she didn't even know she had. Behind her, the door slammed open, and her father's voice cut through the night, angry and slurred. He stumbled out, shotgun in hand, his eyes wild. "Get away from my land!" He roared into the darkness. His voice cracked against the towering figure above him, trembling with fear, disguised as fury. The giant only laughed, rising to his full height, stretching above the house like a monument. "A man like that," he boomed, glancing down at Clara, "don't get to measure your worth. Remember that, girl. You're more than the words he throws." Clara's chest tightened, her breath sharp. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had come, how he could possibly see anything in her at all. But before she could find the words, he tipped his colossal hat with a slow, graceful hand and turned, striding away into the hills. Each step echoed like distant thunder until he was nothing but a shadow melting into the night. The ground stilled. The cicadas sang again. The stars shone brighter in the silence he left behind. Clara stood rooted in place, the echo of his words pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat. Edible. Alive. Worth tasting. She touched her face with trembling fingers, half expecting the word ugly to still linger there. But it didn't, not fully. Something had shifted. Something had cracked open inside her chest. When she finally returned to her narrow bed, the house silent save for her father's snores, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. Was he real? Was it a dream conjured from her own desperate longing? She didn't know. But one thing she did know, the word ugly no longer felt permanent. It felt like a challenge. The days after the giant cowboy's visit were the strangest Clara had ever lived. The fields looked the same, the barn sagged the same. Her father's temper burned just as hot, but something in her no longer bent beneath it all. His words still came sharp, as if each one were meant to slice her down to size, but she no longer swallowed them whole. She let them pass, heavy as stones, refusing to carry them any longer. When he muttered ugly under his breath, Clara's lips pressed into a line, but her chest didn't cave. She'd hear instead the echo of that thunder-deep voice, alive, burning, worth tasting. At first, it was nothing but a whisper she clung to, but soon it became something stronger. She rose each morning before dawn, not only to work, but to look at herself in the cracked mirror by the wash basin. Where once she had avoided her reflection, she now studied it carefully. She searched for that fire he had claimed to see. Slowly, painfully, she began to notice things she had never before dared to name as hers. Her freckles, scattered across her cheeks and nose, looked like constellations, tiny galaxies written into her skin. Her shoulders were not dainty or small, but steady, the shoulders of someone who bore weight without breaking. The calluses on her palms told a story, not of ugliness, but of survival. Her father noticed her new silence, her lack of crumbling, and it only seemed to harden his bitterness. When she didn't flinch, he yelled louder. When she didn't cry, he called her stone-hearted. But Clara wasn't stone. She was learning that strength did not mean shutting herself away. It meant opening, breathing, daring to believe she had something inside her that no cruel word could take. Weeks rolled on, the seasons turning slowly toward autumn. And then, one dusky evening, as she walked the fence line alone, the ground trembled once more. Clara froze. Her breath came fast, her chest both aching with fear and glowing with a strange, wild hope. She turned, and there he was again, striding out of the prairie like a living storm. His boots crushed weeds and rocks beneath them. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but when he looked down, the grin that curved his lips was softer than before. "You ain't the same girl I saw last time," he said, lowering himself until the earth shook with his weight. Clara's voice trembled, but she didn't hide it. "I've been trying to see what you saw." His eyes searched hers, and though they were the size of wagon wheels, they held a warmth she had never known, even from her mother. "Good," he rumbled, "but trying ain't enough. World'll keep coming at you, little one. People'll spit names and cut you down every chance they get. But if you let their voices become your own, you'll lose. If you don't, well, then you're the giant."